He has it all: a faithful wife who loves him, a stable and happy life, and the admiration of his friends. But his next actions change everything, leading to consequences he could not have imagined. James is the kind of man people admire. He is intelligent, thoughtful, and influential, with a life that many envy. His success cannot be separated from his wife Emily. She is more than just a friend, she is his biggest supporter, walking with him through all his trials and triumphs. Emily radiates warmth, her kindness touching everyone who knows her. But behind her gentle smile, she is fighting a secret battle. She is sick, and her mood is getting worse day by day. At first, James is caring, attentive, and protective of her. When Emily learned of his death, she took his hand and promised that they would be together. She believed. He believed. For Emily, love was an unbreakable and sacred bond. But for James, things were starting to change. Her illness and the responsibilities she has taken on begin to wear her down. Her patience weakens, her words grow cold, and the man Emily has married begins to doubt her. Soon, another woman enters James's life. Megan is young, energetic, and full of life. She has everything Emily has, and Emily is now vulnerable. James was drawn to her smile, her confidence, her beauty. What started as a casual conversation turned into something deeper, more sinister. Megan was not just a distraction, she was a temptation that James couldn't resist. While Emily lay in bed fighting death, James's thoughts were elsewhere. He began sleeping late, making excuses, and avoiding the people who loved him most. Emily saw the change. The growing distance between them did not faze her, but she still held on to hope. She believed that the man she loved would come back to her, and that the vows they had made on their wedding day would still be valid. But James had made up his mind. He saw Emily as a burden, a reminder of a life he no longer wanted. In Megan, he found freedom, happiness, and a chance to escape the reality that he no longer needed to face. What James didn't know was that every decision would have consequences, and his choice would teach him a lesson he would never forget. As the days passed, the distance between James and Emily became increasingly unbearable. Even though Emily was sad, she still maintained her respect. She didn't beg, she didn't insist, but her eyes showed a deep pain that was hard to forget. Anyway, James decided to take a look. He was sure that he had to be happy, even if it meant sacrificing the woman who had given him everything. What James didn't understand was that life has a way of balancing the scales. Karma, as they say, never forgets. And while James was building his new life with Megan, the wheels of fate were already in motion. The choices he made would soon come full circle, bringing with them consequences that even he couldn't escape. This was just the beginning of James's journey, a journey of betrayal, loss, and, ultimately, reckoning. As he turned his back on the woman who loved him most, he set into motion a series of events that would change his life forever. Because while love may be forgiving, karma is not. And James was about to find out exactly what that means. The story of James and Emily begins like a fairy tale. The two young women met at university and dreamed of a bright future. Emily studies, filling her world with stories and poems, while the ambitious James studies business. From the day they met, an unbreakable bond has formed between them. Emily's kindness and creativity perfectly match James's determination and perseverance. Together they dream of a life where love and hard work can conquer everything. Their marriage was simple, there was no wealth or details, just the two of them pledging their love to their friends and family. Emily wears a white dress, but her smile is more dazzling than the most expensive clothes. James held her hand tightly, promising to love her, protect her, and be by her side through all her problems. At that time, they were all hopeful and ready to face the world together. The first few years of their marriage were filled with joy and growth. James worked tirelessly to build his career and rose through the ranks with a clear focus. Emily was always there for him, supporting him from the outside. She is a teacher who inspires young minds while managing their small but cozy home. No matter how busy their lives are, they always make time for each other. Whether it's sharing a midnight snack or a walk in the park, love is at the center of everything they do. But life often makes other plans. 5 years into her marriage, Emily began to notice small changes in her health. At first, it was just weakness and the occasional ache, nothing serious. She didn't want to worry James, so she ignored him. But as time goes on, the symptoms become harder to ignore. After weeks of frustration, Emily finally went to the doctor. The diagnosis was disappointing, a rare and deadly cancer. In that moment, Emily's world seemed to stop. She sat in the cold office, fighting back tears, thinking about James and how this would change their lives. But when she broke the news to James that night, he was shocked. He hugged her tightly, whispered comforting words, and promised her that they would get through this together. Emily has a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, their love is strong enough to weather this storm. The next few months are going to be tough. Emily began treatment and endured the painful effects of chemotherapy. Although her once vibrant energy had given way to weakness, she faced each day with a quiet strength that inspired everyone around her. James accompanied her to appointments, held her hand during treatments, and made her feel supported. For a time, their love seemed unbreakable, a shining beacon of hope in the darkness. But then the cracks started. As Emily's condition worsened, the responsibility of caring for James began to weigh heavily. He started working longer hours, not only to keep the money, but to get away from the heavy atmosphere at home. Emily noticed a change. She notices the tiredness in his eyes and how he avoids talking about his health. He tried to understand, he tried to give her the space she needed, but deep down fear gripped him. The fear that his love wasn't enough. At that moment Megan entered their lives. Megan worked in James' office, a bright, confident woman who lit up every room she entered. She was everything Emily was. She was strong, ambitious, and full of life. James couldn't help but stare at her. At first, it was just casual conversation at work, a serious distraction from the pressures of home. But as the days turned into weeks, the conversations grew longer and longer. Megan has another way to find James, to be recognized and, worst of all, to be wanted. Emily continued to work hard on her marriage, oblivious to what was happening. Even on her worst days, she would try to surprise James by cooking his favorite meal or sending him some encouraging notes. She clung to the love they had created, hoping it would be enough to bring them back together. But James changed his mind. He convinced himself that he had done nothing wrong and that he was only seeking comfort in difficult times. What he didn't realize was that he was planting the seeds of betrayal. As Emily's health deteriorated, the emotional distance between them grew. James became colder and stranger. He began to stay out late, using business meetings and deadlines as excuses. Emily tried to reach out to him to remind him of the promise they had made to her, but her words did not work. The man she had married, the man she loved with all her heart, was gone. One night, when Emily was alone in the bright living room, she found an old photo album. It's full of memories from their lives. Weddings, vacations, moments of laughter and love. He ran his finger over the photo and burst into tears. He wanted to believe that those memories still mattered to James, that deep down, the man he loved was still there. But James was drinking and laughing with Megan that night, unaware of the pain he had caused. For him, Megan is an escape, a place to forget the weight of responsibility. He didn't see it as a betrayal. He saw it as a life. But every choice has consequences, and James is about to learn the hard way. Emily knew something was wrong. It wasn't just James who had stayed up all night, refusing to come home. What mattered was the way he looked at her, or rather, how he didn't look at her. The warmth in his eyes was gone. His soft hands that used to remind me of my love for him, but now they were gone. Emily was hurting deep down, but she held on to hope. She told herself that James was just sad, and that this was just a part of their journey together. Even though all the signs were different, she still believed in their love. That was James, living a double life. At home, he claimed to be a supportive husband, but his heart was elsewhere. His mind was filled with thoughts of Megan. She was the woman who had escaped Emily's death. With Megan, he felt alive again. She was energetic and happy, far from the hospital world and the drug-filled world that was heading home. Their love began, long conversations after work, laughing together over coffee. But things soon turned bad. One night, after an office party, James and Megan found each other. There was an unspoken understanding between them that could not be ignored. Megan leaned in, her smile seductive. James ignored her. That night, he crossed a line he could not cross. Emily didn't want to hear words or see evidence to figure out what was going on. She could feel James avoiding her from the moment he took her cell phone. There were no kind words, no comforting words. She was fighting for her life, but she was also fighting for her marriage, a battle she was beginning to realize she might not win. One evening, as James was preparing to leave, Emily asked him to stay with her. She had been waiting for the right moment, and now, with her heart beating so fast, she finally gathered the courage to speak. "James," she said in a trembling voice, "do you still love me?" The question surprised her. She hesitated, trying to find the right words, but nothing came. Instead, she told a story about tiredness and sadness. Emily didn't ask anything else. She just nodded and watched him walk out the door, her tears streaming down her face. That night, Emily found the evidence. Alone in the quiet of his home, he received a call that James accidentally left. He hesitated, his hands still shaking as he opened it. What he saw confirmed his worst fears. Megan's handwriting was filled with love and plans for an upcoming reunion. "Can't refuse the message." Emily's heart ached as she read these words, and every word was like a sword piercing her soul. _4444, but Emily did not face him right away. Instead, he just sat in silence, thinking back over the entire process of their marriage. She thought about the man she loved and the promises they had made to each other. He thought about the lives they had built and the dreams they had. But now, he was alone, maintaining a marriage that was supposed to be a partnership. 4444 that night, when James returned home, Emily was waiting for him. She never cried, nor did she weep. He never blamed or accused. Instead, he just picked up the phone and asked, "Why?" 4444 James got stronger. He had prepared for this moment, but no amount of practice could prepare him for the pain in Emily's eyes. He began to explain, to justify his actions, but Emily stopped him. "I don't want to defend myself," he said quietly. "I want the truth." 4444 For a moment, James considered lying, but he knew it would be pointless. He accepted the relationship and the feelings he had when he was with Megan. He told Emily that he didn't want that to happen, that he was busy and didn't know what to do. Emily listened in silence, her face calm but her heart broken. When he finished, James looked at him with tears in his eyes. 4444, "I gave you everything, James," he said. "I support you when no one else does. So now when I need you the most, you hit me like this." James couldn't face him. He apologized again, but his words rang hollow, lacking the sincerity Emily had hoped for. That was the moment she realized the man she loved was gone, replaced by someone she didn't recognize. The next few days were miserable. James left, saying he needed a place to sort things out. Emily didn't argue with him. He knew it didn't mean anything. Instead, he focused on himself and found peace in his pain. But as she attempts to heal, the pain of Jacob's betrayal serves as a constant reminder of her lost love. Meanwhile, James is embracing his new life with Megan. He's convinced himself he made the right choice, that he deserves to be happy. But deep down, he can't shake the guilt. He's haunted by Emily's face, her tears, her broken heart, the way she looked at him that night. He's tried to bury these feelings, push them away, but they remain, like a shadow that follows him wherever he goes. James didn't realize that karma was already at work. The decisions he's made, the pain he's caused, it all leads to a reckoning he could never have foreseen. And as Emily builds her new life, despite the consequences that await her, she finds a quiet strength within herself, a steadfastness that will carry her through her darkest days. The story is far from over. James learns that betrayal comes at a high price, and karma never forgets. James thought he would do Emily, and he went out. He made himself clear that he needed to start again, the life of no responsibility and grief. Where Meghan is next to him, he is a new man. He brought happiness and strength in his life, and what he believes had been fantastic. But what he did not know was that her new life would be not as though it seems to be. At first, everything was fine. Meghan was happy and exciting, finding new ways to make James forget the guilt he had tried so hard to forget. They went on vacations, ate at expensive restaurants, and enjoyed the luxury that James' success had brought her. Meghan complimented him endlessly, she admired him, and he respected her. For Seamus, it felt like a direct escape from the pain he had left behind. But beneath the surface, cracks were beginning to appear. Meghan's love for James was not as strong as Emily's. While Emily stood by him through every fight, Meghan's love seemed to be tied to her ability to provide the kind of life he wanted for the fun nights and romantic getaways that kept him by her side, and James didn't see her, perhaps not as much as he wanted to see her. At that point, James's career began to suffer. He has spent a lot of time at his job trying to impress Meghan. He is confused, missing deadlines and making mistakes. His manager notices the change and warns Seamus that his job is at risk if he doesn't pay attention. But James, blinded by his new relationship, ignores the warning, believing that everything will be fine. On the other hand, Meghan is starting to show her true colors. She wasn't happy to be the only one with James, she wanted others. There will be more gifts, more holidays, and more joy. Whenever James tries to express his concerns or talk about his problems, Meghan pushes him away, saying she doesn't want to hear about bad things. This morning, James began to feel the weight of his new relationship. The freedom he thought he had found now became a new burden. One day, Meghan had a bold idea. She wants James to sell their house and move to a bigger house, a big house in the city. James, you hesitate. The house they live in is expensive, and his job is difficult, he is not sure that he will be able to afford it. But Meghan wouldn't take no for an answer. He insists, telling James to test his love by giving him the life he deserves. James agreed to please Meghan. He sold his house and borrowed a lot of money to buy the big house he wanted. At first, Meghan was happy and threw a big party to show her friends their new home. But soon the financial problems became unbearable. James was heavily in debt and struggled to pay them off, while maintaining the image of a rich, successful man. While fighting with her, James began to miss Emily. He was filled not only with guilt but also with sadness. He thought about the simple life they had together, the quiet time of love and comfort they had spent together. Emily didn't ask for too much. He enjoyed the little things and was content with the life they had created together. James realizes that what he initially saw as Emily's illness as a burden was actually a time of love and devotion. But time is now up. He made a decision and there is no going back. Then came news that broke James' heart. Emily died. He had learned that from his friends when he had left her. James was deeply saddened by the news of his death. This was the first time he had allowed himself to feel the weight of his actions. She remembered his kindness, his strength, and how he had loved her even when she didn't deserve it. Now he was gone, and that was irreparable. Meghan was unhappy about Emily's death. "It's sad, but it's not your fault either," James said. His unpleasant and insulting words caught James off guard. For the first time, James began to see Meghan's true colors. She was not Emily. He is not a kind, selfless friend who would be there for him in every situation. Meghan was only there for him because of what he could give her, and now, with his wealth, even that was not enough. James's life began to unravel. The job he had once been proud of and secure in was ending. His boss grew tired of James's disinterest and eventually fired him. Without his money, James couldn't pay for the big house Meghan insisted on buying. The bank issued a foreclosure notice, and they were soon forced to vacate the house. And just like that, Meghan was gone. He didn't stay to help James clean up the mess. When the money was gone, he too was gone, leaving James alone to face the consequences of his decision. He lost everything: his wife, his home, his job, and the woman who sacrificed everything. For the first time in years, James was completely alone. He sat in the tiny apartment he had managed to rent, staring at the walls, haunted by memories of the life he had thrown away. The love he had taken for granted, the promises he had broken, the pain he had caused, it all came rushing back. And now, there was no one left to blame but himself. James has lost everything. The wealth, comfort, and companionship he once took for granted are gone. Now he lives in a small, dimly lit apartment with barely enough furniture to fill the space. It's a far cry from the mansion he and Megan once shared, or even the love life he had with Emily. As the days and weeks pass, James finds himself trapped in a cycle of regret and loneliness. One night, James couldn't sleep and sat on the floor of his house, clutching a photo album he hadn't seen in years. It contained pictures of his life with Emily, their wedding, their anniversary, trips to the countryside, and moments of unimaginable joy. Each photo brought back so many memories and an unbearable sense of guilt. Emily looked at him, smiling with love and affection. He had given her everything, but she had given him back with treachery. James thought about the last time he had seen Emily. He looked at her very carefully, then turned away. He remembered her words, "I hope you found what you were looking for, James." She had pushed him away at the time, but now these words came to his mind. What was he looking for? Free? Am I charming? If so, why does he seem so empty now? It was at this point that James began to see what could only be described as the hand of karma at work. The people who had truly loved him now saw him as a threat. His colleagues envied his success, but they wouldn't return his calls. Even Megan, who had sacrificed so much for him, left James to deal with the problems in his next relationship. But the teachings of karma are not just about loneliness and isolation. James begins to face challenges similar to the struggles Emily experienced. One morning, he woke up with a pain in his chest. At first, he ignored it, chalking it up to stress or fatigue. But over time, the pain intensified. Desperate, James went to the hospital, where the doctors announced the bad news: James had suffered a heart attack due to years of stress and lack of self-care. This joke did not go unnoticed by James. Look, he, like Emily, had serious health problems. But this time he had no one to comfort him or support him. The doctor prescribed James medication and recommended a radical change in his lifestyle. Sitting in a small office, James could not help but think about Emily, and he often sat in a similar chair, listening to stories that no one else should hear. To make amends, James decides to visit Emily's grave. He hasn't been there since her funeral because he has suppressed the guilt and shame from remembering her. One cold, grey morning, James walks to the grave with a white rose in his hand. When he reaches her grave, he stands speechless, unable to express the emotions that are stirring in his heart. Finally, he kneels down and whispers, "I'm sorry, Emily. My deepest condolences to everyone." Tears streamed down his face and his voice cracked. "You didn't deserve what I did to you. You were the best part of my life, and I threw it all away." As James sat there, pouring out his heart, he felt something else. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to truly grieve, not just for Emily, but for the life they had shared and the love they had lost. He sat at Emily's grave for hours, thinking about his mistakes and the lessons they had taught him. James begins to do a little bit of recovery. He starts volunteering at the local hospital, helping patients in need. His way of honoring Emily and giving back in a way he never could before. While he can't change the past, he hopes he can change the future. One day, while working, James meets a girl who reminds him of Emily. She was kind, loving, and her calm energy touched his heart. They began to talk, and for the first time in a long time James saw a glimmer of hope. He didn't think it was a second chance to love her, he wasn't ready for that, but rather a reminder that despite all the hardships, the world can still offer moments of connection and meaning. Karma was a severe blow to James, but it also gave him a chance to reflect, to grow, to find purpose. He would never forget the pain he had caused and the lessons he had learned. While he can't rewrite his story with Emily, he can honor her memory by living a life he's proud of. James' life has changed in ways he never thought possible. He is no longer a man driven by greed and selfishness. He now lives with a deep sense of responsibility for his actions and carries the lessons he has learned like a scar on his heart. The volunteer work she began at the hospital has become more than just a way to fill her days, it has become her life, a way to connect with people and herself. At first, James did little work, refusing to listen to himself. He cleaned the room, brought water to the sick, or sat with those who were not alone. In those quiet moments, as he listened to others' stories of pain and struggle, he began to understand the depth of Emily's resilience. Every cancer patient she met remembered her strength, her calmness, and the love she had for her even when she turned her back on them. One day, James found himself helping a woman named Clara. He was 50 years old, with soft eyes and a gentle demeanor. Clara is battling breast cancer and often sits alone in her room, quietly knitting. James expresses his frustration because he doesn't know how to start a conversation. To his surprise, Clara smiles and invites him to sit down. Several weeks later, James and Clara develop an unexpected bond. Clara has a way of speaking that reminds James of Emily, smart, kind, and thoughtful. She told him about her family, her fears, and her hopes for the future. James listened carefully and offered comfort and support whenever he could. Clara didn't know that she was also helping James get better. Her courage and kindness became an inspiration to him, a reminder that even in difficult times there is still room for goodness. Through the hospital experience, James began to reveal parts of himself that he had long buried. He rediscovered compassion, patience, and a desire to make a difference. The man once consumed by greed and lust now found satisfaction in helping others. And while he carried the burden of his past, he didn't let it define him. Outside the hospital, James's life was simple. He lived humbly, not seeking wealth or the approval of others. Her small home, once a symbol of her pride, became a sanctuary, a place where she could think and grow. He spent his evenings reading Emily's favorite books and immersing himself in the stories she told him. In those quiet moments, he was closer to her than he had been in years. One night, while going through a box of old things, James found a letter. The letter was tucked into Emily's favorite book, the edges were worn, but the handwriting was hers. James opened the letter, shook her hand, and began to read. The letter had been written a few weeks before Emily's death. In this book, he wrote about his love for James, his hopes for the future, and his forgiveness for the pain he had caused her. He wrote, "James, I have always believed that love transcends the good times, love helps each other in times of need. The man I know you to be. At this moment, he is both sad and deeply grateful. Emily's love was a gift she once took for granted, but now she used it as a source of strength." He carefully folded the letter, framed it, and placed it on his bedside table to remember the woman who had changed his life. _4444_ James' journey of redemption was not about erasing the past, but about honoring it. He knew he couldn't fix the problems Emily had brought, but he could live his life according to what he had taught her. Every kindness, every act of compassion, brought him closer to becoming the man he believed he could be. Over the years, James continued to work at the hospital, becoming a mentor to young volunteers and a comfort to many patients. Her story, once filled with betrayal and grief, is now filled with growth and redemption. Although he never remarried, he enjoyed the friendships he made and the lives he touched. On the anniversary of Emily's death, James went to her grave to pay his respects, as he did every year. He took a white rose, his favorite flower, and knelt by her gravestone. "Thank you, Emily," he whispered. "Thank you for loving me when I didn't deserve it and for showing me the way when I was lost. I hope I made you proud." As James stood to leave, the wind blew through the cemetery, bringing back memories. Peace. He left with anguish knowing that while he couldn't change the past, he had done all he could to honor Emily and the love they had for each other. After years of reflecting on his mistakes and working to rebuild his life, James began to feel something he hadn't felt in a long time: peace. His days were filled with quiet purpose. He wasn't chasing wealth or status anymore. Instead, he found fulfillment in small but meaningful actions, such as helping others, listening to their struggles, and simply being present. James continued his volunteer work at the hospital, where he had become something of a fixture. Nurses and staff often referred to him as Mr. James, a kind presence who brought hope to even the darkest days. He would bring flowers for patients who hadn't had visitors in weeks, read to those who couldn't leave their beds, and sit quietly with those who just needed someone to listen. One of his most memorable encounters came with a young boy named Ethan. Ethan was only 10 years old and had been diagnosed with leukemia. Despite his frail body, Ethan had a spark of curiosity and a mischievous smile that lit up the room. James found himself drawn to the boy's energy, and the two quickly formed a bond. Ethan loved to ask questions. "Mr. James," he once said, "why do people do bad things when they know it'll hurt others?" James paused, taken aback by the simplicity of the question. It was the same question he had often asked himself. "Sometimes," James said gently, "people don't realize how their actions will affect others. And sometimes, they are too focused on what they think will make them happy in the moment." Ethan thought about this for a while before asking, "But do they get a second chance to make it right?" James smiled, a bittersweet expression crossing his face. "Not always," he replied. "But if they do, they should take it and never waste it." This conversation stayed with James. Ethan, despite his young age, had an understanding of life that many adults struggled to grasp. It reminded James of Emily, of her wisdom and her capacity for forgiveness. Every day spent with Ethan felt like a lesson, a chance to learn and grow through the eyes of a child who had faced more challenges than most adults. As Ethan's condition worsened, James spent even more time with him, holding his hand and telling him stories. He shared tales of Emily, not as a way of seeking pity but to honor her memory and the impact she had on his life. Ethan listened with wide eyes, nodding as James spoke about love, regret, and redemption. One afternoon, Ethan's mother pulled James aside. "You've done so much for him," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you." James shook his head. "It's me who should thank him," he said. "Ethan has reminded me of what truly matters." When Ethan passed away a few weeks later, James was there, holding his hand and promising him that he would always remember the lessons he had taught him. It was a painful loss, but it also reinforced James's purpose. He realized that while he couldn't change his past, he could make a difference in the present. And that was enough. Over time, James became a mentor to new volunteers, sharing his story with those who wanted to get involved. He didn't gloat over his mistakes, he chose to use them as examples of what he wouldn't do. His honesty and vulnerability inspired others, and his journey was a testament to the power of redemption. One day, a young woman named Anna came to him after a consultation. She had just started working at a hospital, and she was struggling to find her roots. "Mr. James," she replied nervously, "how are you doing? How do you find the strength to help others when you're in trouble?" Hemi smiled, her voice calm and steady. "I keep going because I know what it's like to lose. And I know what it's like to believe in yourself, even when you don't believe in yourself." That's what Emily said, hoping to teach others. Anna bowed, tears welling up in her eyes. "Thank you," he said. "I needed to hear that." Times like this were the way Hemi lived. He didn't want recognition or praise, he just wanted to honor Emily's memory by living a life filled with kindness and compassion. In doing so, he found a kind of peace that neither money nor ambition could provide. In the years that followed, James wrote, not as a way to apologize, but as a way to share the journey. The book, Lessons in Love and Loss, was a quiet success, touching the hearts of readers with its honesty and sensitivity. In that opening chapter, James writes, "I used to be a man who didn't care about love. I believed that wealth and freedom were the keys to happiness, but I was wrong. True happiness comes from the friendships we make, the love we give, and the lessons we learn along the way. It is not a story of perfection, but a story of redemption." James spent his final years in a simple yet fulfilling way. He continued to visit Emily's grave, bringing her flowers and speaking to her as if she were still with him. She continued to be a guiding light in his life, shaping the person he became. When James died peacefully in his sleep, he was remembered not as someone who had made mistakes, but as someone who had learned from them. His legacy is one of love, humility, and redemption, a reminder that it is never too late to change and that even deep wounds can lead to growth. James' life may have ended, but his story continues to touch the lives of those who knew him. During his funeral, the small church was packed with people, volunteers, hospital staff, former patients, and even strangers reading his memoirs. Each brought a piece of the kindness James showed, the lessons he taught, and the love he shared. Among those who participated was Anna, a young volunteer whom James had trained. Inspired by James' words and actions, she dedicated her life to helping others. He stood by the casket, whispering a silent prayer of thanks. "Thank you, Mr. James," he said. "You showed me what it means to live with purpose." Clara's family was also there. Although Clara had died years ago, her daughter remembered James comforting her mother in her final days. He took the stage at the event to share his memories. "My mother always talked about Mr. James," she said, her voice calm but full of emotion. She said he reminded her that even in difficult times, there is kindness. He not only helped her but helped our entire family find peace. As stories like these were told, it became clear that James' life had become a symbol of hope and change. His mistakes, which had once been shameful, had been transformed into lessons that inspired others to be better, to love more deeply, and to live better. Shortly after James passed away, the hospital where James had volunteered for many years decided to honor him. He founded the James Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to providing emotional and financial support to terminally ill patients. The foundation's mission is simple: to ensure that no one feels alone during this most difficult time. The first project the foundation funded was the creation of a garden at the hospital. It was named Emily's Garden, in honor of the woman whose love helped transform James. The garden becomes a sanctuary for patients, families, and staff, a place of reflection, healing, and hope. The sign on the door reads, "In memory of Emily and James, proof that love can change lives, and life can change the world." Long after James' death, his memory continues to resonate with readers. They are shared in book clubs, hospitals, and support groups, becoming a source of comfort for those struggling with their issues. The student, who was about to leave his family, wrote a letter to the publisher thanking James for saving his marriage. "Your words saved me from making the biggest mistake of my life," 4444 wrote. "You made me realize the value of what I already have and the importance of cherishing it. For this I am always grateful." The letters continued to pour in over the years, each one testifying to the enormous impact of Jacob's story. Although he is no longer alive to read these letters, his legacy lives on in the life he began. James' words remind us that life is a journey of choices, and that every choice shapes us. His mistakes, no matter how painful, are the basis for his repentance. His transformation is not about undoing the past, but rather learning and using those lessons to make his life better for himself and others. Ultimately, Hemi discovers that inner peace does not come from wealth or power, but from love and purpose. His story is a reminder that no matter how far we have come, it is never too late to turn back, apologize, or make amends. As the sun sets in Emily's garden, where flowers bloom and the air is filled with the soft sounds of life, we discover a simple yet profound truth: love heals, in all its forms. Power, transformation, survival. Life is full of choices, and what we learn from those choices can shape not only our future, but the lives of those who come after us. If James' words resonate with you, think about the relationships in your life. Be grateful for those who support you, forgive those who have wronged you, and never forget to love. So subscribe to Ethan Lord Stories for more inspiring, healing, and reminders of what really matters. Let's spread love, kindness, and hope together.